Hello, my name is Aneko, and I will be presenting our project entitled Guess That Baby. This is a game that applies concepts of genetics and inheritance, which we'll see later in this run-through. This is the tutorial scene. It has 5 parts, as you can see in the table of contents here on the left side. I'm going to scroll through the whole text, and again, you can pause the video if you'd like to read. The background mainly talks about genetics, sex chromosomes, and the difference between a characteristic and a trait. Now we can press the next button to go to the next part of the tutorial. We can press the back button to go back. We can also click on the titles here in the table of contents. This next part of the tutorial is about Mendelian inheritance. It talks about dominant and recessive alleles, and the difference between homozygous and heterozygous. It also lists the characteristics in the game which will apply Mendelian inheritance: eye color, ear type, and then the presence of dimples, cleft chin, and widow's peak. This next part explains polygenic inheritance. The characteristics in the game that will be applied with this concept are skin pigmentation and hair texture. But since there are actually plenty of other factors that affect polygenic inheritance, only a simplified process will be featured in this game. Next, we have sex-related inheritance. This game focuses on one sex-influenced characteristic, which is pattern baldness. The baldness allele is dominant in males, but it is recessive in females. The last part of the tutorial explains how to actually play the game. The goal of the game is to be able to predict an offspring's traits based on the given traits of the parents. On top is a screenshot of the game scene. You may pause the video if you'd like to keep reading the instructions, but you don't have to worry since they'll be demonstrated later as we play the game.
After the tutorial, we are now brought to the main game window. Here we can see a lot of details, but for starters, we know that the child is male because according to the sex chromosomes, it's XY. We can click on the hints button to show us charts showing the pattern baldness guide and the list of dominant and recessive traits and polygenic inheritance levels for the skin tone and hair texture. Clicking on the first button, we get to choose the skin color of the child. We know for sure that it's going to be level 1 because it's the average of the parents. And next we get to choose the eye color. We know it's going to be brown because the dad has brown eyes. Next we can choose the earlobe type. We know it's going to be unattached because one of the parents has unattached ears and that is the dominant trait. And next, for the presence of dimples, we know that the child is going to have dimples for sure because both parents have them. And for the cleft chin, since the cleft chin is dominant and the father has it, the child will inherit it too. Next, we get to choose the hairline. We know that the child will have widow's peak hairline because one of the parents does. And for the hair texture, we know it's going to be level 1 because it is the average of the parents' hair texture. Next, we have the option for baldness. We know for sure that the child won't be bald because neither parents exhibit this trait. And after all this, we can click the Done button and we will be brought to the results page. Here we can see whether or not we got the right trait for every characteristic. And if we hit play again, we will be brought to the start menu.
Now let's have another run through. We can skip the tutorial scene since we already went over that. This brings us directly to the game scene. We can see that the baby is, once again, male. Let's start with his skin pigmentation. Here, I'll show you what happens if we click on the different choices. But we know that the baby will have level 3 skin pigmentation because it is the average of the levels of the parents. Now for eye color, we have brown and blue. We know that the baby will be brown-eyed because his dad has it and it's a dominant trait. But let's get this wrong on purpose just so we see how it looks like in the result scene. So the same goes for ear type. We know it must be unattached because it's dominant and both parents have it. But let's get it wrong on purpose. Now both parents have dimples and it's a dominant trait, so the baby must have dimples too. So the father has cleft chin, which is the dominant trait, so the baby will have it too. And next is widow's peak. We can't really tell from the illustrations because both parents are bald, but we can see here in the list that they have both flat hairlines, so the same goes for the baby. Now for hair texture, I'll be clicking on the different options we have first. Now it says that both parents have level 2 hair texture on the list, so that means that the child must have the same. However, since both parents are balding, the sex of the baby doesn't really matter, since we know that 2 balding parents will also produce a baby with pattern baldness. Now there we have it. We got all the traits right except for eye color and ear type, which we purposely got wrong. And we can see here that the correct answers are displayed.
In order to show more cases, we will have a third run-through. We can skip the tutorial scenes once again, and we can move on to the main game scene. We can see now that the child is female because of the sex chromosomes XX. From here on, we will just be showing the usual gameplay while showcasing the different traits of a female child. We know that the skin tone will be level 2, eyes are brown, earlobes are unattached. We know that there will be no dimples present, however, there will be a cleft chin and a widow's peak hairline. Here are the different possible hair texture types for a female child. However, we know that this particular child will end up with a hair texture level 2. This is how a female child looks when she experiences balding. However, we know that this particular child will not experience balding. Here we can check the hints tab again and the different guides that can help us run through the game. And we click done to get to the results page. We see here that we got all traits correct for each characteristic, and that is all for our gameplay. Next, we will be showcasing the different files and illustrations we used to make this project possible. This is where we compiled all of our resources. Here we can see all the files needed for coding and all the illustrations Aneko drew. We can see here the different types of bases of the children, the different ears for the respective skin colors. We can see here different eye colors and different hair types for a female child and a male child. We can also see here the dad's bases, the dad's hairstyles, and the different types of chin and dimples. We can also see here all the illustrations for the icons used for every button and all the charts used for guide. And then the mom's traits and characteristics and more illustrations, and here are all the files that were needed for coding. In total, there were 175 files needed to make this game happen. 150 of those were illustrations hand-drawn by Aneko. Here we open NetBeans, where we encoded everything because it is the text editor we used for JavaScript. And now I will just be showcasing the main game code. This is where we set the aesthetic and how everything looked. You can see all of that. That is just for how the scene looks, where the buttons are placed and the positioning of the images. Here we have the controller, where we encoded all the functions and all the checking and basically the math part of the game. This is how we control all the functions that is performed when the buttons are clicked. And here we can see where we randomize the parents' traits. And right below that is the code where we actually set the images to those randomized traits. All of that code is just for one single scene. And as we can see here, all those files have from 50 lines of code to more than 600 lines of code. And in total, we have more than 4,000 lines of code. And we can see here all the images and illustrations Aneko drew. And that's all we needed to make this project possible. Thank you so much for your time, and stay safe.